Welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. That is Xan. That is Gonzo. I am Shoob. And today we are here to do Big 12 win totals part 2. If you missed our part 1 podcast / video, highly recommend you go ahead and do that and watch it. A lot of in-depth breakdown there. Good stuff there if you're a Big 12 fan. And we are here to hit it home with the rest of the Big 12 conference here. Few teams that could make some noise this year. We shall see. We are ready to get into it. Gentlemen, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's ride.
Let's do it.
When I looked at this being 8.5, I said to myself, no way, no how. That is an easy under. But then I opened my handy dandy notebook and I did a little bit of research. I did a little bit of digging.
The Texas Longhorns, a team that perennially underachieves. Are you telling me they are going to go 10-2 or are they going to go 8-4?
Get the dang police out there because it's going to be animal cruelty what they're going to put this Buffalo through this season. Thank God that certain things are legal in Colorado because you're going to need a lot of that to watch this team.
All right, leading off here, Oklahoma State, the Pokes, sitting with a line of 6 wins. Last year was a pretty crazy season, a tale of two halves for Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy, this is his 19th season in Stillwater. Xan, our resident Oklahoma State alum, take us away on your team. Let's go.
Let me just jump right into it. I mean, net TARP rating minus 4.5. No secret, this team got gutted in the transfer portal. Brought in some pieces, but ultimately lost more than they brought in. And they're not really recruiting at a great well. Whole nother topic for a whole nother day. I won't dive in too deep into it. But anyway, the biggest thing about this, man, you look at this team, offensive efficiency 72nd last year, which is actually surprisingly higher than I thought it was. And I think that's because of the first half of the season, because the whole second half of the season for Oklahoma State was absolutely dreadful, hard to watch. Defensive efficiency, 32nd, pretty solid, but offensive line play was terrible, 113th in line yards, 104 in sack rate. Definitely stand to improve there. Derek Mason decided to take a hiatus. He is no longer the defensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator is now Brian Nardo, who comes in from Gannon University. So that will certainly be an interesting hire as the Pokes switch over to a 3-3-5 defense this year. They wanted to do more 3-man than 4-man down. So Mike Gundy is copying a little bit of the Iowa State defensive formula here. And they retain offensive coordinator Casey Dunn. God knows why, but they have retained Casey Dunn. And let's go ahead and jump into the offense, guys, after my little rant. So they lost Spencer Sanders, longtime starter to Ole Miss. Definitely a big loss there, but they also bring in Alan Bowman, who was the backup of Michigan for the last few years. And then they have Garrett Rangel also there in case Alan Bowman gets hurt. He is the insurance policy there. Not really high on that. A lot of fans at Oklahoma State are pretty high on that just because of what he did to the Pokes. But ultimately, I mean, he was 3rd, 4th string at Michigan for a reason for a couple of years. I think there's definitely going to be a step back in QB play. But at least the Pokes return Ollie Gordon, Jaden Nixon, and add Elijah Collins, who's actually pretty solid for Michigan State. So they have a little tandem there that they can utilize to have a respectable run game, despite losing Dominic Richardson to Baylor. So I don't think there'll be too much of a drop-off at running in the running situation, considering that they were dreadful running the ball last year anyway. Mass exodus. This is the biggest thing that people talk about with Oklahoma State. Mass exodus of star players. John Paul Richardson going to TCU. Stephon Johnson going to Houston. Bryson Green going to Wisconsin. All people who played significant snaps for the Pokes last year. To supplement those losses, they brought in DeJon Stribling from Washington State, Arlen Bruce from Iowa, and Leon Johnson from George Fox, and return Brennan Presley, Jaden Bray, Blaine Green. So they still have a pretty decent receiving room, but they still lost a lot of guys who played a very key role in producing last year. In terms of their offensive line, that was their real issue last year. A lot of blame goes to depth. But this year, they brought in a good transfer tackle in Dalton Cooper from Texas State, who's regarded as a very good pass protection tackle. Jake Springfield is also a solid pass protection tackle, so they should be good on the edges. But they lost their best offensive lineman in Hunter Woodard, who actually just decided to retire from football. He had another year of eligibility to decide to retire. So the interior offense is going to be suspect for the Pokes, and we'll see how much better their offensive line gets. I don't think it can really get any worse than last year. I think it'll be slightly improved. Jump over to the defense. It's ugly, guys. It's ugly. Look at the secondary. Lost Jabbar Muhammad, their best cover corner, by a mile to Washington. Lost their safety, Thomas Harper, to Notre Dame. They returned Corey Black. They brought in Kenneth Harris from Arkansas State, who is an average against the pass, but he's no Jabbar Muhammad. So ultimately, they take a step back there. They lost Jason Taylor to the NFL, but at least they were able to keep Kendall Daniels, which was huge. And they return a young, promising group of safeties who could be good in the future with a little more experience. At the next level, linebackers, they return Colin Oliver, which is a huge return. They bring in Justin Wright from Tulsa, who's great in pass coverage and a decent run stopper. And they retain Xavier Benson, and they have a young guy named Nick Martin who looks to improve this year and get significant playing time and show that he can play ball. One thing that a lot of people probably don't know about Oklahoma State is they were actually 17th in defensive line yards last year. They had a very good defensive line headed by Tyler Lacey, who is now, and Brock Martin, who are now both gone to the NFL. And they supplemented that with Justin Kirkland from Utah Tech, who's actually graded as a great run defender, and Anthony Goodlow from Tulsa, who's just solid overall. So we will see what that looks like for the Pokes defense, considering that they're going from 4 down to 3 down. I think it's actually going to hurt them a little less losing those pieces, considering they brought in 2 good pieces. So they may actually still be decent on the defensive line. And when we look at the Pokes holistically, though, they were 123rd in sack rate last year. That is so bad for their defensive line. They were not able to get to the quarterback. And a lot of that is attributed to just how bad their secondary is. Their secondary gets burned so quickly that there's no time for a pass rush to even get to the quarterback. So that's the biggest concern with Oklahoma State. I think they might have the worst secondary in the Big 12 this year. And we'll see. Certainly at the corner position, I'm bearish on them given that situation.
Man, you can't call this guy a homer. You cannot call Xan a homer. He is the opposite of a homer. He's the self-proclaimed most skeptical OSU fan out there.
I really am, man. Like, I really am. So for me, guys, I see for OSU, being a fan and with my heart, I see 5 to 7 wins, but I have to make a decision because obviously the line is sitting there at 6. Central Arkansas is a win. At Arizona State is a probable. South Bama is a probable. It's not a win. Don't hate me, guys. It's not a guaranteed win. Iowa State should be able to win that, but it is in Ames. That's a probable. And then again, Oklahoma State gets screwed with the early bye week in back-to-back years. Having an early bye week is a huge disadvantage for those of you that don't know, because if you suffer any injuries, you don't have any bye weeks to recover later in the season. So early bye week is a huge disadvantage. Then they go off and play Kansas State. I think that's an L. They play Kansas. I think that's an L. They play at West Virginia. That one's winnable. They play Cincy. That's winnable. OU is basically a guaranteed L. I mean, we all know this. It's the Mike Gundy philosophy. You see the big red helmet and you just kind of like tuck your tail and start planning for UCF next week. And they play at UCF the week after that. And that's probably an L. It's at the Bounce House. And then they play at Houston, and I think that's an L. I think that's another L. And then they play BYU to finish out the season at home, and I think that's a probable. So right now, I'm thinking 6-6 is kind of, I think the absolute best that they win a lot of their probables is 8-4. Like Alan Bowman pans out, everyone's just like over the moon and like overshot projections, but that is the absolute best case scenario, 8-4. I think it's more likely that they're going to be 6-6, but I'm going to give Gundy some credit for being a coach and for his pedigree. So I'm going to say, you know what? This is where the homer kicks in. 7-5 over, but I think it's 6-6, push to over.
Oh, there it is. There it is. There's the green arrow. We knew he had it in him.
Xan, what you said at the tail end is what formulates my basis for my opinion. When I saw the roster exodus, I was like, oh, wow, this is a bona fide under. I mean, it's not even close. But I cannot fade Michael Gundy. I cannot. This man finds a way to win against all odds, against himself standing in the way. He finds a way to exceed expectations, and that's why I'm pushed to over on the Pokes. Brian Nardo is going to be the next defensive coordinator at USC. You know how Gundy will go to these small D3 JUCO independent ball colleges and find absolute home run hitters. And now I don't think Nardo's going to be a stud in year one, but I think eventually he will develop into quite a catch. In regards to really the rest of the roster, the only other guys I really wanted to highlight was just on the D line. You had Oates, he was a JUCO all conference guy, and in the secondary, again, JUCO. Webb was all conference, all American. I'm very intrigued to see what Mr. George Fox over here, Leon Johnson III, does. I mean, George Fox legit sounds like a World War II general. So I'm just intrigued to see what he does playing in the Big 12. Into the schedule now. I think Central Arkansas, they'll be. I mean, yeah, ASU's tough, but they're also rebuilding. So you would want to think the continuity could help the Pokes there. I think they have a better shot of beating South Alabama, though it is one of those that would probably take South Alabama on the spread. And then let me just do some others that I think are absolute wins. Central Arkansas, South Alabama, Cincinnati. I like their odds to beat Houston. And then kind of like I've said in the earlier video, I mean, just find me a couple more wins. I think West Virginia Mountain Mama, they can win that in Morgantown. We're at 5. Probably lose between the Kansas schools, but if you can clip Kansas, that puts you at 6, and then just find a way to beat one of the newcomers in UCF and BYU. So I still think against all odds, Mike Gundy, who is just an absolute enigma of a man, is going to find a way to coach these boys up and get the Pokes to 7-5, 6-6 at the worst.
All right, 2 overs on Oklahoma State. So starting with the quarterback, I think with Alan Bowman, I actually think that there's a chance he could be a better passer than Spencer Sanders was. I think there's a chance he could be a little bit more accurate than Spencer Sanders. But, I mean, like you highlighted, the guy hasn't played college football in almost 3 years now. He hasn't played hardly at all. He barely played at Michigan. He only had like 3 passes. So it's a huge unknown. He also had 2 collapsed lungs during that time too. You know, it's a big red flag for me. I mean, is he going to be a shrill in the pocket? Like, is Alan Bowman going to be any sort of percentage? Is he going to be 80% of what he was when he was at Texas Tech? I mean, it's 2 collapsed lungs later and a big hiatus of playing time. I mean, it's a huge red flag. I don't like the quarterback depth. I will say the linebacker room for the Pokes, I love the linebacker room a lot. And then as far as the Big 12 play, man, I mean, it's the schedule that's the saving grace. And I agree with you guys too. I went into this very skeptical of the Pokes. I thought that the talent that had left Oklahoma State last year was not supplemented completely, but I feel like the talent that they brought in actually did a lot better of a job of supplementing the losses than I initially thought it did. And this schedule, man, is the saving grace. They play the entire bottom 5 of the Big 12 when it comes to conference odds. You're going to see the graphic here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. They play all 5 of the worst teams in the Big 12 in terms of title odds, and they play 7 of the lowest 8, and that's not including themselves because they're also included in that. So they literally play all of the worst teams in the Big 12. I don't know who did what to get the Big 12 to give them this schedule, but I think that this is the saving grace that's going to keep the bowl streak alive for Mike Gundy and the Pokes. This is extremely schedule driven for me. I see over 6 wins. I have 6.1 actually as my number, so like barely over. But yeah, I really don't think this is going to be a good team all in all. And yeah, this may be a team that can get to a bowl game because of its schedule, but I really think it's going to be, you know, more of like a 4-8, 5-7 quality team that might be getting to a bowl game because of this schedule. I mean, they play all the new schools. I mean, I don't, yeah. Other than, you know, like you said, tuck your tail in Bedlam and prepare for UCF. Other than that, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they could win any one of these games, maybe other than Kansas State. So, yeah.
Mike Gundy's pregame speech for Bedlam is, okay, guys, try not to lose too bad. Let's go. But anyway, yeah, man, and I'm going to that Houston game at Houston, and I have that as an L because I think Houston's got a lot of talent. And I can fully see Stephon Johnson revenge tour game. Stephon Johnson, 150 yards, 3 touchdowns, and we're just like, oh, that happened. Oh.
Love it. Healthy skepticism from our resident OSU alum, Xan. So it's time to move on here up north to Lawrence, Kansas. You talk about a team that exceeded expectations and then some last year. Lance Leipold, he is coming in to his third season at the helm at Kansas. This team started really hot last year. Remember when Kansas was 5-0? Kansas and Syracuse were those two teams that just came out of nowhere. They both were ranked. They were both undefeated halfway through the regular season. Yeah, it didn't really end well. Didn't end well for Kansas. They finished 6-7, but they still made that bowl game. That was a thriller against Arkansas, even though they lost. But anyways, Gonzo, I'll let you take the floor here on the Jayhawks, sitting with a line of 6 wins even.
I remember last year with the first overall pick in the Fade draft, I took the Kansas Jayhawks, and the least I could do to apologize is go over on Rock, Chalk, Jayhawk. This ain't basketball, baby. We got football to be excited about in Lawrence. I love Jalen Daniels returning and Jason Bean. I mean, how often do you get two decent quarterbacks who come back? So Daniels, who was a mobile guy, if he goes down, you've got Bean, who made that. I mean, from what I heard, like when they lost to Arkansas, of him sailing that pass at the end, like that was the trigger in his head that made him want to come back for another season, because he didn't want his career to end like that. That's awesome. You bring in 1,000, not bring in, you bring back a 1,000-yard rusher in Neal. So that's huge. Devin Neal. So that's huge for the ground game. The whole wide receiver and tight end core is returning, except for Stephen McBride. And then on the O-line, you got 4 of the 5 starters back. All the reserves return. You've got 2 transfers who I think will contribute, and that's Spencer Lovell from California. He got hurt 3 games in, so he's coming back healthy, as well as Logan Brown from Wisconsin. Those are going to be your tackles. And now we pump the hype train a little bit because we've hit the defensive line. You lose the whole front 4. And that's going to be tough to replace. You've got some returners in Hayden Hatcher and Jareem Robinson, and you've brought in transfers to back them up, as well as Tommy Dunn on the interior. And his cohort in the middle will be Devin Phillips, who some project to be an all-conference guy. But this depth is concerning. You know, if you cannot stop the run, you're going to have a really hard time in college football, especially at the Power 5 level. Making my way back up through this defense, I got depth concerns at linebacker. I love that Craig Young, Rich Miller, and Tywan Berryhill are all seniors, but then after them, we've got JB Brown from Bowling Green transferring in, and Logan Brantley, and then probably a bunch of just other kind of reserve freshman types. So I got concerns with, you know, what's going to happen if they lose a guy there. But at least in the secondary, everybody's back. They're all veteran upperclassmen with 2 or more senior reserves. I'm interested to see what Demarius McGee from LSU does. Demarius really couldn't find a role here at LSU, so I'm intrigued to see what he does as a Jayhawk. And then I think the Kansas got a really good pickup in Akili Hubbard from Gold West, which probably in California somewhere. He's going to be good safety depth piece who had 4 interceptions last year. I mean, for goodness sakes, even the special teams is loaded. They got like 4 kickers. So going into the schedule with the Gonzo model, if you want to call it that, I'll go in order, but 4-0 start. I mean, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to Illinois, but I think that game being in Lawrence is what is the kind of coin flip Jayhawk for me there. And then, I mean, you probably lose to Texas, but wouldn't it be hilarious if they found a way to muster up that energy again and ended up derailing Texas's season? Oh my gosh. And then UCF having to come to Lawrence, I think that's a probable for the Jayhawks. At Oak State, I think the road component makes that difficult, but probably a win. Then you get to take a week off. I mean, you probably lose the OU, but again, I mean, they're coming into Lawrence. So who knows? You beat Iowa State on the road, and then you got, man, I'm so happy for their fans. You finally get some home games to be just stoked about. You get Tech and Kansas State coming in. You got a chance because it's in Lawrence. If they can at least split that, they're looking really pretty, and then you get to cap the win. You cap the season off feeling good about yourself with a win against Cincy. So with my numbers, I've got 6 hard wins, and then just get me one. I'm over on the Jayhawks. I'm really excited to see if Leopold can replicate the success and turn it into something even more special.
Yeah, I really struggle with this one, to be honest. Line's sitting at 6 wins. I went through the schedule like 7 different times, and I think 6 wins is like on the money. I really struggle with this one. But as far as the team, I mean, the 2 different units, they couldn't be any more inverse of each other. The offense last year, Kansas's offense was number 1 in the Big 12 in yards per play. They averaged 7.0 yards per play, which is pretty good. The defense, they were dead last in the Big 12 in yards per play allowed. So very big contrast there. I love the quarterback options that they have with Daniels and Bean. I mean, it's those are 2 of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. 2 of the best options they have at quarterback. I think not a lot of teams can say they have 2 really good starters that could play quarterback for them on their roster in this conference. Their offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, he's one of the best out there, man. He's one of those guys that I think is an elite play caller. I'm surprised he hasn't been poached yet by a bigger school. He probably will be eventually, but yeah, Kotelnicki is one of the best play callers out there. Yeah, I think the offense should be great again, man. Like you said, 2 quarterback options there. One gets injured. Oh, okay, no problem. That's very good. That's very good, especially when looking at teams' floors here. I think that there's top 10 efficiency upside with this offense, which is nuts. They were number 12 last year. I think they can get into the top 10 this year. I think the O-line should slightly improve, even though it wasn't really that great. I think Kansas's biggest problems is that they're just not great on either sides of the lines of scrimmage. And the defense, like you highlighted, Gonzo, D-line should be better by default, but I don't expect any massive improvement. I think maybe this defense could get into like the top 80, maybe top 70, but I don't see much there, to be honest. It leaves a lot to be desired. And, honestly, when it comes down to the schedule here and my numbers, I have them projected for 5.9. So my numbers say a very, very small under here, but once again, I'm overriding that. I'm going to go over on Kansas. I initially had under. I really struggle with this, but I think the offense is going to be really good again. And I just need the defense. I just need y'all to just improve. Just give me a little bit of improvement. Just get into like the top 70, top 80. I'm not asking for much. I don't like the scheduling dynamics for Kansas because a lot of the teams that are, the lower teams of the Big 12, they have a lot of those away. So I don't really like that other than BYU. They got at home, which is nice, but scheduling dynamics not favorable, but I love the coaching staff. And my theme here, if I'm 50-50, give me a good coaching staff. I'm going to take over on Kansas.
I reiterate everything you guys said about the offense. It's going to be fantastic. 12th in offensive efficiency. They're 14th in sack rate. They're really good at protecting the quarterback. Not so much in line yards, but I will say, man, I love the QB depth situation. As you guys mentioned, you got a pull backup who's he's a senior. Jason Bean is a senior. And he's proven, and he's another fast guy. I really like Devin Neal. I think he is an NFL guy. They're returning so much production at wide receiver. Their offensive line is iffy, but they do have some potential stars in there. Logan Brown was a former 5-star, that transfer. So we could see some improvement there. And they do have some good pieces coming back. Really like what's returning on the secondary. I think that'll be the strongest unit of their defense. As you guys alluded to, you mentioned JB Brown. Love it. He's really solid all around. Great linebacker. But outside of him, they really don't have much at that level. So if he goes down, they're going to be Swiss cheese to the run game. I will say this, man, their defensive line was 125th in defensive line yards last year and 95th in pass sack rate. That is just atrocious. And based on what they've lost and what they've brought in, I see that not really improving much at all, if possibly even getting worse. That's my biggest concern with Kansas, man. They're going to have so much firepower, but they're going to be Swiss cheese. I think they're going to get scored on quite a bit. Teams who have a good running attack or a good offensive line are going to run it all down their throat and control time of possession against them, which is a nightmare for prolific offenses. I gotta say, man, I think 6 is right on the dot. I think 6 is perfect. Missouri State, I think, is a win. Illinois, I think, is a probable. I don't think that's a guaranteed win, given all the circumstances here. At Nevada, I got as a win. BYU, I has as a probable. Texas, I think they can contest Texas because their offense is pretty nice, but ultimately their defense is going to lose them that game. I think they lose. UCF is a probable. Oklahoma State, I think they win. And then a bye week going to OU, I think OU is a probable. Iowa State is a probable, but I think that's actually a very poor matchup for them. Iowa State's strengths are basically their defense, and if they can get more stops, and Kansas doesn't have such a good defense, Iowa State is also at home. They can very well beat the Jayhawks there. I really like Iowa State in that matchup from a personnel standpoint. Texas Tech and Kansas State right after that. If they end up losing to OU and Iowa State, then you got to play Texas Tech and Kansas State. That can just be demoralizing right there. They might walk out with just one win in that stretch. And then they've got at Cincy. They should win that game. But I'm thinking 6 wins. I don't think 7. I could see them getting 7 if they're able to like go 4-0 in their first 4 games. But other than that, man, I really just don't see it. I'm going with the Kansas under 6-6 bowl game.
All right, so Xan is very, very lean under on Kansas. Me and Gonzo, we are shade to the over at 6 wins. That Iowa State comment is a perfect transition because I wholeheartedly agree. I think Kansas versus Iowa State, that's like one single game that could decide either of these two teams' win totals, in my opinion. But yeah, let's talk about Iowa State. They were pretty much, like Xan alluded to, they were pretty much the inverse of Kansas. They really were. They had an elite defense, but a very bad offense. So it's very, very interesting to see how these teams are constructed very differently here in the Big 12 Conference. Iowa State last year, man, they were a heck of a case study, man. 4-8 last year. After they had that core with Brock Purdy and Breece Hall and Charlie Kolar, had those guys there for a while. The drop-off
Xavier
last
Hutchinson.
year. Yeah, exactly. The drop-off was pretty bad last year. But they weren't nearly as bad of a 4-8 team as you normally would think a 4-8 team is. They were 0-6 in one possession games in the Big 12 Conference. I'll repeat that. Iowa State went 0-6 in Big 12 Conference games last year that were decided by one possession or less. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you just win a couple more of those, Iowa State's going bowling. It's one bounce of the ball either way. And I think this team could have had much better fortunes. It's Matt Campbell's 8th season in Ames, guys. He's been there for a while now. We're getting close to almost a decade here for Matt Campbell's time in Ames. But anyways, let's talk about the offense. Let's address the elephant in the room here off the bat. 85th last year in offensive efficiency. They were dead last in the Big 12 in yards per play. They have a new offensive coordinator, Nate Skielhaas, promoted from wide receiver coach. He does have no prior coordinating experience. So that's a huge wild card right there. I know Tom Manning, Iowa State fans wanted him out the door, and thankfully he left. But now we have Skielhaas, who was promoted internally. He has no prior play calling experience. He played quarterback at Illinois from 2010 to 2013, which is interesting, but we'll see about that. We'll see if that's an upgrade or not. Hunter Dekkers returns for his second year as the starter. The numbers last year, it definitely left a lot to be desired for Dekkers, not the greatest. The running back room, it's going to be a mix of Jabril Brock, Cartevious Norton, and Eli Sanders. I expect them to go by a committee like they kind of did last year. Wide receiver room, Xavier Hutchinson. That was a big loss to the draft. He had 107 receptions last year. That was 34% of the team's total receptions, all hauled in by one guy, Xavier Hutchinson. He was graded the number 1 wide receiver in the Big 12 by PFF, by the way. So, yeah, point is made. He was a big loss. They did, however, land Jaden Higgins from Eastern Kentucky, who apparently was graded out really well by PFF. He's projected to be wide receiver X in the system on the depth chart there, so that'll be interesting. I also do like that they returned both tight ends, Deshaun Hanika and Easton Dean. They both return with decent snap experience. Offensive line, surprisingly, they were only 123rd in the FBS, one of the worst in terms of line yards. But most of the starters that they had last year returned this year. So I would expect the offensive line to improve by default because they just have a lot of those guys coming back. And then defensively, this is where we get to talk some good things about Iowa State. They were 7th. I repeat, 7th in the country. This was a top 10 defense in schedule adjusted efficiency. number 1 in the Big 12 in yards per play allowed. Defensive coordinator John Heacock is doing a fantastic job over there at Iowa State. D-line, as expected, it was pretty good, 22nd in average line yards. They lose Will McDonald, however, to the draft. Also, MJ Anderson, I thought, was a pretty big loss, too, along the D-line. And then the linebacker room, Colby Reeder, another guy, pretty big loss for Iowa State. Graded the number 1 linebacker in the Big 12 by PFF last year. That was Colby Reeder. However, I do like Gary Vaughn. He returns as a solid player in the linebacker room. And then the secondary, I do like a couple players in the secondary. I like corner TJ Tampa. He was graded as the number 1 qualified corner in the Big 12 last year. So, yeah, Iowa State, I mean, they had a top 10 defense last year, so it shouldn't be surprising that all these guys are graded out really well. And then their safety, Bo Freeler, he's also a pretty good player that I like who is returning. So individually, there are a few good players on this defense, but I mean, let's be honest here. It's probably not going to be top 10 in the country. I think it's definitely going to take a step back, but I think it'll still be very solid. The schedule dynamics, not favorable at all. Not favorable at all. You got the Cyhawks showdown there with Iowa. I mean, they finally beat Iowa last year. They finally did it. It seems like forever. We always talk about that game. They finally beat Iowa last year, but it's like, are you going to beat them again? You know, can you pull off the magic 2 years in a row? I know some Iowa State fans probably are skeptical. It is at home. And also they got to go at Ohio. And I know last year the Cyclones, they beat the crap out of Ohio 43-10. But I'm just saying, don't be asleep for that game because they got a really good quarterback, Cordis Rourke, and it is away. So I'm just saying, I expect them to win, but don't be half asleep when you go there to Athens, Ohio. And then the Big 12 draw, pretty brutal. They play 5 out of the 6 top teams in the Big 12 in terms of odds, and then their home away splits are just bad. All the bad teams in the Big 12, they got to play away. They got to play at Cincinnati. They got to play at BYU. I mean, it's not like they have any layup home games against some of the lower tier competition in the Big 12. I think that, the new OC is a wild card. I'm not really a big believer in what we've seen from Hunter Decker's defense. Probably is going to drop off, but I still think it'll be solid. I think that despite this team being very much better than its record showed last year, I have a hard time seeing them get to a bowl game, which I hate to do this to Iowa State, man, because I love Matt Campbell, but I'm going lean under at 5.5 for the Cyclones. I think 5 wins sounds about right, but would not be surprised if they get to 6.
So, I mean, again, like I reiterate a lot of the things you said, Shoob. The biggest thing is they're -4 in defensive target, and that is the strength of this team. They're not very strong on offense, as we've talked about, 85th in offensive efficiency. And you already talked about line yards and sack rate, so I won't beat a dead horse there. I do like that they have J.J. Cole at least, so if Deckers goes down, they have a young guy in the mix who could potentially be a stud. Definitely something there. I'm not too big on their running back room between Brock and Norton. I mean, they could improve, but based on what I've seen so far, they haven't given me reason for, just promise. And then, of course, the losses at the wide receiver position, I think far exceed what they've brought in and what they've retained. So I definitely see just a step back in all those areas. Offensive line, they at least returned Darrell Simmons and Gerard Hufford, 2 of their best offensive linemen. But, the rest of the line, although returning, very suspect. So we'll see how that plays out. They should at least be as good as they were last year on the O-line, if not maybe slightly better. But, man, I mean, you hit it, man. I love some pieces of the secondary that they were able to keep. They kept really big pieces. But they lost Anthony Johnson, who was an outstanding in coverage. They lost Orion Johnson at linebacker, who was probably their second best linebacker behind Reeder, as you mentioned. But, they at least were able to retain Vaughn, as you brought up as well. But, dude, the defensive line, they lost 2 crucial components of their defensive line. 2 guys, one being Will McDonald, who's an NFL guy. They at least returned defensive tackle Isaiah Lee, who is a good run stuffer. But you can't lose 2 critical guys on your defensive line and not expect to regress a little bit at that position. I'm seeing regression even on their defense. I do expect their defense, just like you, Shoob, to be good, to be solid, but 7th in efficiency, no, probably maybe like 20 to 30 range. I think they're going to drop back a little bit. And if the offense doesn't make any steps forward, which right now it looks like they might even make a step backward, based on what they've lost, it just doesn't bode well for Iowa State, man. And I love them. I think they're very well coached. They're a team that doesn't recruit very well, but they develop. Think David Montgomery. Think of all those NFL running backs. That's what they've been doing lately. It's been their bread and butter. But Breece Hall, but it just, I don't know if it's in the cards, man. When I was looking through Iowa State's schedule, I said the absolute best I can see this team doing is 6-6 at absolute best. Wins against Northern Iowa. Play against Iowa. Iowa's under new regime. I would think that they're going to be a little more competent offensively. And, they always find a way to lose to Iowa. Other than last year, the outlier year, they always find a way to lose to Iowa. Play Ohio, probably a win. Oklahoma State is a probable. I think Oklahoma State will win that game. Play OU, play TCU, probably losses. Cincy is a probable. Then they get a bye week to prep for Baylor, but they have to go at Baylor off the bye week. That's not really a good bye week schedule. You'd hope to at least play home if you're going to get Baylor, but no, that's a probable. Kansas, I think they can get Kansas. I do like the personnel matchup versus Kansas. I think that they have an advantage in that game versus Kansas, and I think that's one that's winnable for them. But BYU probable, Texas L, Kansas State probable. I think if everything goes right, it's 6 wins. And just given Iowa State's history, everything is not going to go right, man. I think they're a 4 to 5 win team. I'm going on the under for the Cyclones. And I hate that because, I really do like Matt Campbell the same way you do.
Phenomenal analysis, boys. Let's get another red arrow up there. I'm under on the Cyclones. Hate to do this to Matt Campbell and company, but it comes down to 2 factors for me. Shieldhaas just not calling plays. I saw this happen at LSU, and I'm blanking on the name, but I saw this happen where the Tigers brought in an OC who had no legitimate play calling experience, and that did not bode well for an SEC school. And I think when you promote Nate Shieldhaas from wide receivers coach to play calling at OC and QB coach, I just don't know if in his first year if that's enough to elevate Deckers to a level that can get this team to a bowl game. For me, the most guaranteed losses, not 100%, but probably going to be losses, are Oklahoma, TCU, Kansas, Texas, K-State. That's 5 right there. So that means you're telling me outside of North Iowa and Cincy that they're going to find a way to flip the coin on Iowa, Ohio, Oak State, Baylor, BYU. I just don't see it. I think this is a team that's going to play hard the whole season. And I think just if the scheduling dynamics were a little different, and if just maybe a couple more pieces had come in through the transfer portal, that Iowa State would be primed to go bowling this year. I do not think that's the case, but I think they will still go back to form in the upcoming years and finish respectable. But I just think it's going to be a rough year for them this year.
All right, 3-way consensus on the under for Iowa State. And honestly, this scares me a little bit, if I'm to be honest, because we're all doubting Matt Campbell, but I guess we'll see here. 5.5 traditionally is a line that, you want to go over because of bowl game motivation, but I guess we'll see. Let's talk about some hot seat, boys. The seat is very hot here. Very, very hot. Let's head out to Morgantown, West Virginia, the Mountaineers. Many Mountaineer faithful, they want Neil Brown out of there. New AD comes in. He says, all right, I just got here. I'll give him one more year. Well, this is it. This is that year. West Virginia sitting with a line of 5.5. Xan, take us away on the Neers.
Mountaineers have not really changed from last year. Net tarp rating 0. More or less the same team. Minus 2.5 on offense, plus 2.5 on defense. What really surprised me when I looked at the Neers, they were 36 in offensive efficiency last year. That really shocked me. I did not expect that at all. So they actually have some pretty good play calling there, and 36 in sack rate. So they protect their quarterback at a reasonable rate. Either that or Garrett Green's just really good at eluding sacks, which he is a dual threat guy. So let's jump into that. JT Daniels is gone. Garrett Green played a little bit last year, got some opportunities, and he's going to be the starter this year. That whole JT Daniels experiment has failed. And I just got to say, man, defensive efficiency 101, 101st. And that was kind of surprising for me because I always saw that as a strength for West Virginia. But You know what? Let me stop jumping around. Let me jump back to the offense. I just talked about the quarterbacks. Over to the running backs, man. They lost Tony Mathis, their starting running back, to Houston. But you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing because they have the stud running back named CJ Donaldson, who I think is actually a beast. I think he's an NFL guy. I mean, in a very limited sample size, he had a little stretch where he was just going crazy for West Virginia as a freshman, as a true freshman. So I think he is an outstanding player, and he definitely brings a lot of upside to this team. They also brought in Devin Carter, wide receiver from NC State, who's graded as a 4-star transfer. So that should be able to supplement the loss of Bryce Ford Wheaton. But they also lost Caden Prather to Maryland. So they're taking an overall step back at the wide receiver room. Sure, they brought in Sean Polk from Kent State, but I think overall what they lost is greater than what they brought in. So we'll see there. They're going to have to hope some of the younger guys in the wide receiver room step up and take that leap. As far as the offensive line, man, their center Zach Frazier returns. He's excellent offensive lineman. They lost both guards, but at least they returned Thomas Remack, who was another guard who rotated in and got significant snaps, and he's pretty good as a pass blocker. And they returned Wyatt Millam, their tackle, who's very good against the pass. So they at least have some solid pieces. They have about 3 solid pieces on their offensive line, which usually makes for a pretty good unit. So that's something that bodes well for the Mountaineers. So hopefully they can at least utilize that to improve upon their pass game and give CJ Donaldson some time, some running lanes. So I think there is a little bit of upside in that because I do think Garrett Green is a little bit better than JT Daniels. So that could be a good sign for West Virginia, but ultimately I'm just worried about that passing production. On the defensive end, man, safety, cornerback. They lost safety Jason Cox, who was a solid player. They at least return safety Aubrey Banks, who's an absolute dominant force in coverage, and he's very good against the run. He's a very good player overall. They added Montre Miller from Kent State, who was very good against coverage, in passing coverage, and they added Keyshawn Cobb from Buffalo, who's actually pretty good against the run. So they retained and brought in some pretty good pieces for their secondary. I think overall their secondary will still be, I think the overall secondary is going to be the strongest unit on their defense. And that's something that I think is pretty common for the Mountaineers. They usually have relatively better secondaries than the rest of their units. Now, linebacker is a big weakness for this team. They don't have any true standouts at that next level. I'm definitely worried about their rush defense. Defensive line, they were 69th in defensive line yards last year, 31st in pass down sack rate. So they had a pretty good pass rush last year. But they lost Jordan Jefferson to LSU and Dante Sills, who ran out of eligibility. That's just huge losses on the interior defensive line. They at least returned they at least brought in Tyron Bradley from Abilene Christian and returned Sean Martin, who's a solid player on the edges for rushing, but their interior presence has been decimated. And so that's going to be kind of an issue when it comes to stopping rush defenses, but they should still have good pressure off the edges. They should still have a decent secondary, but man, the linebackers and the interior line are big question marks for me with this team. And now we look over to the schedule. At Penn State, that's an L, guys. Let's just be real. It's at Penn State. Penn State's a quality team. That's an L. Season opener 2, that place is going to be packed. Duquesne, that's a win. Come on. Duquesne's just collecting the check. Take the check, take the L. This is how it goes, unless you're Appalachian State versus A&M. Pitt. Pitt, probable. I think that's a probable. I mean, I think they could beat Pitt. They're at home. I think it's a very winnable game. They fought tooth and nail against Pitt last year, and we talked about in ACC win totals how we think Pitt's taken quite a step back this year. So I do think that's a very winnable game for West Virginia.
Well, Pitt fans don't seem to see it that way.
I mean, we can see how it goes. But so they're going to come out of this either 2-1 or 1-2 from their non-con. Then they have to start with Texas Tech. Honestly, this could be a trap game for Tech starting in conference play. I think West Virginia's strengths actually match up pretty well with what Tech has. I think Tech will still win it, but I think West Virginia is going to give them a scare there. And then at TCU, I think is an L. Bye week, you come in, you play at Houston. I think off the bye week, you have a good chance to maybe get a win against Houston, but that's a probable for me. Play Oklahoma State. I think that's a probable, but historically Oklahoma State has had their number. I think they lose to Oklahoma State, even though they're at home. At UCF, probable, just because those East Coast boys, something about that. I just feel like there's this It's a new opponent, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about that one. I just know that that doesn't feel like a definite for either team for me, and I don't know why. BYU, I say a probable but lean to a loss. OU, probable because they always give OU fits, but lean to a loss. Cincinnati, I think, is probable because Cincinnati's going to win some games somewhere along the line. They got to beat somebody. I don't think they're just going to get thrashed by everyone they play. And West Virginia is one of those teams that they'll probably hang in there with. So that's a probable. At Baylor, another probable because I told you I have uncertainty with Baylor. I'm the only one in the under. So with that being said, guys, what I've got Duquesne win, possibly Pitts, maybe Houston. Other than that, like I'm not seeing a lot of guarantees here. I'm seeing a lot of probables. And given that a lot of these teams they're playing have better coaching staffs and I think better rosters in these probable games, I don't think that bodes well for them. I don't think they're going to go get 6 wins and go bowling. I think they're more likely to win 5 games. Give me the under on West Virginia.
I'm going to say the following 4 names to start: Chad Scott, Sean Reagan, Bilal Marshall, Blaine Stewart. No, that is not your fraternity pledge class. That is the offensive coaching staff for West Virginia. Granted, Sean Reagan was promoted, so he's been there. But I think losing Graham Harrell to Purdue was big. I mean, Graham has had many high-profile stops, as a quarterback at Texas Tech, and then I'm pretty sure he was coordinator at USC at one point. So you lose him. I'm not really high on the offense outside of Donaldson, who is a stud. And I do like this offensive line more so. The tackle, Doug Nestor, he's graded out well on PFF. But really, the quarterback play just doesn't really wow me. A shocker. I'm under if this hasn't indicated that yet. Just between Green and Martial, that just doesn't wow me. And then they've also got a couple guys who have some all-conference expectations. And those guys would be Sean Martin on the D line, and coming in from Abilene Christian, Tyron Bradley. Jumping now from personnel to the schedule. I'll tell you right here, not to rehash the schedule, but here are the guarantee. Like what I have are most likely to be losses: Penn State, Texas Tech, TCU, UCF, OU, Baylor. That's 6 right there. Now there's a good chance that they could probably flip one of those. But if I can look at your schedule and already pinpoint 6 most likely losses, that's a problem. And this AD is going to get pressured to jump on Neil Brown if they start struggling out the gate, which is just a terrible position for everybody to be in. And yeah, I just don't think this is a bowl team. I don't think it's the worst team in the Big 12, but honestly, I think this win total is going to be set 1 win lower to really make better sweat. But I'm on the under. I think it's 5-7 for the Nears.
Country roads, take me home to the place Neil Brown belongs. That's the coaching carousel. So that's where he's going to be by the end of this season.
Love it.
Guys, just look at the schedule, man. Just look at the schedule. This guy's already on the hot seat. You got to start out with Penn State. Then, okay, Duquesne's a win. Then you got Pitt, not a guarantee. Texas Tech at TCU. I mean, worst case scenario, you're starting out 1-4. Very, 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 very reasonable for West Virginia to start out 1-4 if things don't go right. If West Virginia's starting out 1-4 with that bye week, you think Neil Brown's going to retain his job? I mean, I don't know. How much of a leash is he going to have here with the new AD? That's one thing I was looking at. When I look at coaches on the hot seat, I'm like, all right, how's like the first half of their schedule? Because if the first half of their schedule is just like, automatic L's like it was for Georgia Tech last year, it's like, yeah, the guy's going to get canned. We all know he's going to get canned. I mean, I don't want to call for anybody's head, but it's just kind of a tough situation there. And yeah, I don't really see a whole lot of upside with this roster. The new offensive coordinator, Xan, how you were talking about how the 36th overall in offensive efficiency, how that was a little surprising. I think it's surprising because I think Graham Harrell is actually low-key a pretty good coordinator. And he left for Purdue, obviously. I think that's a big loss. And the new OC, Chad Scott, yeah, he was promoted from running backs coach. Yeah, he has a little bit of coordinator experience, but that's a big unknown. Is he going to be a great coordinator? I will say though, I do think Garrett Green is actually overall a little bit of an upgrade over JT Daniels just because of the running ability. But don't like the depth behind Garrett Green. I mean, yeah, guys, first 5 games are tough. If they get off to a 1-4 start, Neil Brown gets fired. I think quit factor is a huge component of this team this year. There's a lot of downside just because, you'll see teams give up. And I don't like the fact that, they got a lot of these teams that are potentially they could be like BYU, Cincinnati, maybe Baylor, maybe UCF. If they got those teams later in the season, if Neil Brown's fired and the team's kind of given up at that point, we've seen this happen all the time. It's downside potential. I'm going under here. I think 5.5 is pretty solid line to give a pretty fairly confident under for me. Three-way consensus here on West Virginia. Boys, are you ready to talk about the newbies in the Big 12? We are done with all the OGs. It's time to finish off here with all the newcomers. Cincinnati sitting with a line of 5 wins even. Gonzo, I believe you are up to bat first on the Bearcats. How is their welcome to the Big 12 going to pan out this year?
Well, I think the books kind of already showed their hand when they set these win totals, given that they put UCF a full 2 games above everyone in this bottom 3 here. Cincinnati, I mean, what they did a couple years ago was phenomenal. The first G5 to ever make a playoff. And I mean, hey, they competed with Bama. They didn't get completely run out of the building. That being said, they were finally a victim of their own success. Luke Fickell leaves for Wisconsin and it takes the entire staff. And I think this step up in competition is going to be a wake-up call. And not like the wake-up call like it is for UCF, where like they might still make a bowl game. Like I am under on Cincinnati. Let's look at some personnel. You got Emory Jones at quarterback. This is his 3rd stop. It's very rare that quarterbacks on that 3rd transfer are, if there's anything really left. And it's not like he's coming to a plug and play Oklahoma, using it as an example type system. Like they've scrapped the cupboard and they're starting over. So I really don't like that Emory Jones is kind of going to have to be the guy they're relying on. I know the potential is there, but they might have been better off with Ben Bryant stand. At running back, this is selfish. I like Corey Kiner. He was at LSU for a minute. He went back home because he's from Ohio. He had 5 tutties last year, so he might be a bright spot. The whole wide receiver room is gone, and you bring in a Donovan Ollie from Washington State, Xavier Henderson from UF, D. Wiggins from Louisville, and just a bunch of other transfers. So you're going transfer heavy. Tight end, they've got some bright spots with Shaman and Peyton Singletary. They're kind of your catch, block, pass catcher crew. And then the backup, Joey Belgian, who transferred from Western Kentucky, he had a knee injury. So God bless his recovery, but I just don't know if he'll really be a factor at all this year after that. On the O-line, you get Gerhart returning at center, but you lose Tunstall and Cooper to the NFL, Quinn to graduation, and Hubert to the portal. That's the long way of saying you lose a lot. One good pickup I can mention is Luke Kendra coming in from Louisville. So he followed Satterfield in from there, and DeAndre Bruford from Kentucky, and then Trevor Radzovich from Penn. So again, you got some good pickups, but you're supplementing with transfers, and injuries could deplete this unit very fast. And so when you've got O-line depth, that's a huge red flag for me. D-line, Van and Briggs, they've got all conference projections. Phillips comes back. You got good depth behind them. The linebacking core, you're bringing in Jack Dingle to really anchor it down in the middle. With behind him, you got Dorian Jones, also following Satterfield from Louisville, as well as Griziette coming in from Utah State as kind of a hybrid rusher. I have depth concerns here as well. With the secondary, your starting cornerbacks are gone. That is concerning to me, again, with a rebuild. Here's one more bright spot after the secondary is the punter. Maine Fletcher is projected to be an All-American and All-Conference. And that makes sense because they're going to be using him a lot. So, I like the talking heads getting ahead on that. With the schedule, I see 2 bona fide wins. That's Eastern Kentucky and Miami, Ohio in the first 3 games. In between, that's at Pitt. man, I like that matchup a lot. But they're going to lose the Pitt in in Heinz Field. And then, oh, welcome to the Big 12. You get to host Oklahoma, which that's going to be gnarly for the fans, but that is going to be a loss. At BYU, I mean, maybe you win, but I have that chalked up as a loss. You get a bye week, host Iowa State. That's a toss-up game. And then Baylor comes in, and I think in the coaching battle, you take Aranda over Satterfield there. So I think they lose to Baylor. At Oak State, I lean more of a loss with them going to have to play the Pokes. And then UCF comes in, and you get to, rekindle the American nostalgia. But I think at this point in the season, they're kind of reeling while UCF is peaking. So UCF probably beats them. Then I think you got two toss-ups more so between Houston and West Virginia. West Virginia at the end of the year, I mean, for all we know, Neil Brown is fired and nobody cares. So maybe you sneak that one out. And then Kansas at home, yeah, I don't think they win that game if Kansas lives up to the hype that we're giving them. So Cincinnati, you've got a lot to be proud of, but I just think they're going to be in a rebuilding year. This is probably a 3 to 4 win season. But I think they'll be back. It'll just take time, but under for me.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the quarterback room, guys. I mean, Ben Bryant was pretty solid last year. And yeah, the fact that Emory Jones transferred in and is pretty much, I mean, he wasn't guaranteed the starting job, but I think it's presumed he's going to be the starter. What does that say about Evan Prater? Evan Prater, he's kind of looked like kind of a bust. I know he's a 4-star recruit. They had high hopes for him, but it does kind of worry me. And you just look at this whole roster. I mean, coaching staff, I think it's a downgrade from Luke Fickell. I mean, it's hard to replace that. Quarterback, downgrade. I really think if they had held on to Ben Bryant, I would be a little bit more optimistic. Defense, probably it should still be solid, but I still see a little bit of a downgrade. I mean, again, coaching staff loss, that's big. And then competition. I mean, the competition difference is going to be big this year. That just comes with going into a new conference from the G5 into the P5. I think obviously offense will take a step back. The schedule, I'm expecting 2-1 in the non-con. Big 12 draw, I will say for Cincinnati is fairly easy. They play only one of the top 5 teams. So I will say Cincinnati did dealt a good hand here with the schedule difficulty, but even with the schedule being a lot easier, their win total is only sitting at 5 wins. I mean, that's brutal right there. They play 8 of the 9 bottom teams, not including themselves. So it's like them and Oklahoma State. I don't know how they got these scheduling draws, but they literally just went through, okay, here's the Big 12 teams ranked 1 through 14. Okay, Cincinnati, you get all the bottom teams. So it's just weird how that works. But even despite that, yeah, my numbers have 5.4 wins, but I'm overriding that, guys. I'm overriding that. I'm going to go under 5 wins here. And yeah, I like Cincinnati a lot. I like the program, but you lose Luke Fickell, the timing of that when you're going into the Big 12, that's just tough. I mean, Scott Satterfield I just think it's just a downgrade. Let's just be honest here. But I mean, hopefully better days are ahead for the Bearcats program. I just think that they are going to have a little bit of a tough time adjusting to the Big 12, especially with the quarterback room. So I'm under as well on Cincy at 5 wins.
I will say they were 34th in defensive efficiency last year and had great pieces on their defense. I like Brian Brown. I think he's a pretty good defensive coordinator hire. He had the 14th most efficient defense over there at Louisville. So definitely someone who can utilize talent. So I think that is something to be said. There's at least some hope for this coaching staff right there. Brad Glenn comes in, the Virginia Tech passing coordinator. I think that's just more a relationship thing than a proven commodity. Not really sure about that hire. But I do like the defensive coordinator hire. I will give them that. I'm with you guys. Share the same concerns about quarterback. I mean, if you listen to last year's pod where we did Pac-12 win totals, we said Emory Jones is the star for Arizona State. Under. So what's that say about Cincinnati? Truthfully, I'm with you guys. Ben Bryant to Emory Jones? Why did you guys even flirt with Emory Jones? That's a downgrade. It 100% is. I think that's poor judgment on the coaching staff right there. Corey Kiner is expected to start running back. They lost Charles McClelland, who was their best running back. Downgrade. Cincinnati also lost 2 wide receivers to the NFL, Trey Tucker and Tyler Scott. That's anytime you lose two wide receivers who are good enough to get drafted to the NFL, you're going to take a step back. I don't care what you brought in. They got Xavier Henderson, a 4-star from Florida, 4-star transfer. I mean, Aaron Turner from UConn has 500 yards in production. Buckhalter, Ollie, to combine, they have 800 yards, 900 yards production. I mean, you're bringing in production at least, so it's not all an all complete loss, but I have to think you're still taking a step back, losing two NFL guys like that. Outman, I mean, they also had a lot of guys transfer out, so they're losing depth at the wide receiver position as well, in addition to that. Gonzo already touched on the offensive line. I think it'll be a decent group, but again, depth is a concern. Defense, my God, guys, their secondary got depleted. I mean, they lost Taj Ward. They lost J.Q. Hardaway to Kentucky. They lost Jaquan Shepard to Maryland. They lost Javon Hicks. All very good, all very good secondary guys. They at least return Sammy Anderson and Byron Threats and then bring in Jordan Young from Florida. But ultimately, they're taking a step back in their secondary. And then Gonzo, you already touched on Jones. You already touched on Griziak. But Griziak is an elite pass rusher as well. He is graded very highly as a pass rusher and a great run defender. And I think that's at least something that we can mention. I'm surprised no one brought up defensive tackle Dante Corleone, who is like the #1 graded PFF defensive tackle, like in all of college football. He returns, and Briggs returns, as you mentioned. So that's huge. Their defensive line is still going to be very, very good. They're going to have a good pass rush and probably going to be able to stuff the run a little bit. But the offense, man, that's where the biggest question mark is. I like their defense, though. It's a huge upside on their defense. But man, when you have to play in a league like this, I think the coaching is suspect, and I think the offense is suspect. Eastern Kentucky, W. At Pitt, I think is very winnable, but we'll see. That's not a guarantee. That's probable. Miami of Ohio, W. OU, probably an L. BYU, I lean towards an L. Bye week to prepare for Iowa State, I think it's a probable, but just because of the bye week and it's at home, I lean to W. Baylor, probable. Oklahoma State, probable. But these probables, all of these next probables that I'm mentioning, I lean L, lean towards a loss. Baylor, Oklahoma State, UCF, I lean as probables to L's. At Houston, I think they lose. At West Virginia, I think is a probable. I think they lose. In Kansas, the same way. And even if they sneak a couple of those probables out, they're still below 5 or they're right at 5. So I'm on the under, guys. Cincinnati under all the way. I do think that they will be a quality program in the future. They're just going to have to build a little bit. They've lost far too much.
Agreed. All right. Third consecutive three-way consensus under for Iowa State, West Virginia, and Cincinnati. So we are not high here on the bottom tier of the Big 12 going into 2023, but can that trend turn around here with Houston sitting with a win total of 5 wins? I am going to lead us off on the Cougars. Houston, obviously, very similar situation as Cincinnati, a former AAC school coming into the Big 12. Big step up in competition. Houston was 8-5 last season. This is Dana Holgerson's 5th season at Houston now. So low-key, he's been there for almost a half a decade now. So somehow, some way, Dana Holgerson, man, he found his way back to the Big 12 conference. Even though he was trying to get out of it, he found his way back. The offense last year for Houston, they were 26th overall in offensive efficiency. They lost 3 players off that offense to the draft. Clayton Tune, man, I was a huge Clayton Tune fan. I think he was a big loss. I think it is being understated how much of a loss Clayton Tune is. He was a good passer and an effective runner. Like, I think Clayton Tune was one of the most underrated players in all of college football last year. He was very valuable to this Houston team, and he was a huge reason why Houston was inside the top 30 in offense last year. I mean, obviously, he was the quarterback. The replacement is transfer Donovan Smith from Texas Tech, which I actually find this is very, very interesting. When this initially happened, I was like, okay, this is very interesting. I see it on its surface as a slight downgrade at quarterback. I actually think Donovan Smith has a lot of upside potential, but for now, I'm expecting it to be a slight downgrade at quarterback. But if best case scenario for Houston, if Donovan Smith like unlocks another level, I think that this could be another good offense again. At running back, they brought in transfer Tony Mathis Jr. from West Virginia, Stacy Snead as well, averaged 6.6 yards per attempt last year. He is in the running back mix. The wide receiver room, Nate Dell, Tank Dell, another big loss, man. Clayton Tune and Nate Dell, two big losses. Can't understate it enough. He had over 100 receptions, which was 32%, nearly a third of the team's total receptions, all hauled in by one man. The good news, though, is that the returning receivers all have experience in production. It's just not like Nathaniel Dell. So they do have guys coming back with experience, but just not to the talent level of a third-round pick. The offensive line, last year, it was pretty solid, but they return only 46% snap continuity, which is dead last in the Big 12 and the third worst in all the Power 5. Left tackle, Patrick Paul, he's a terrific pass blocker. Oniji graded out well last year. He's going to be playing right tackle. Their guards, Tyler Johnson and center Jack Freeman, also, they're all graded out as terrific pass blockers. So I will say, even though the snap continuity looks bad for Houston, I think that functionally this offensive line is really good because obviously it's an air raid system. It's Dana Holgorsen, and this offensive line pass blocks very well. That's what they are designed to do. So even though they lost Cameron Johnson to Missouri, who was a 4-star transfer, I still like this offensive line for functional purposes. The defense, they were 90th overall in defensive efficiency last year. Man, this defense took a massive step back from 2021 to 2022. In 21, they were 27th. It was a top 30 defense. They had a few guys drafted off that defense. Houston, man, they definitely took a dip last year. Defensive line was solid against the run, but not at getting to the quarterback. They took massive losses along the defensive line, man. DeAnthony Jones was the number 4 edge rusher by PFF. Atlius Bell, number 7. Derek Parrish as well, very great, very similar grades according to PFF. All those guys are losses along the defensive line. The linebacker room, linebacker room leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion. Tremarcus Cheeks, I think his name is pretty cool, but also very appropriate because his PFF grades were Cheeks. So, as far as the secondary, they have 3 new transfer starters. I don't expect the secondary to be very good. However, their safety transfer, Adoree Halsey from New Mexico, graded out very well. But then again, we look at these guys coming in as transfers that have very good grades. Let's keep in mind they were all at, lower competition more often than not. So we'll see how he does against Power 5 competition now. And then the schedule. Their non-conference schedule, I see as 3-0 or potentially 2-1. I don't really think that that's not a layup by any means. I think UTSA is still a very solid team. They still have Frank Harris and company there, even though they did lose their best receiver. And Houston UTSA went into like a crazy triple overtime game last year in the Alamo Dome. So, I mean, Houston, I know you're at home, but you got to be careful. I think that could be an L. They should beat Rice. Welcome to the Big 12 officially. You get to host TCU, the defending national runner-ups. Man, I feel like the Big 12 gave all the new schools like really tough matchups off the bat just to like make a point or something like that.
Party like, hey, this is what it tastes like.
Yeah, I feel like it was all these schedules here were very strategical in my opinion. But anyways, I will say, though, the one thing that I like about this schedule is that they do have a few winnable home games in Big 12 play in West Virginia, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State. I think those are all games that they could potentially win, and those are all at home, which when you're doing win totals, again, this is a strategy. You want to look for playing bad teams at home because those are most likely wins, and they do have a handful of those. So even though I will say I'm going to lean under here on Houston, and it's a lean under at 5 wins, I would not be surprised if they at least push here because best case scenario, they can win a lot of those toss-up games at home against the lower competition. And then there's 2 games on this schedule before I hand it over to Xan that I just want to point out here. You want to talk about revenge games? Houston. Donovan Smith is your quarterback now. Week 5 at Texas Tech, Donovan Smith returns to Lubbock to face his former team. That's going to be very interesting. And then bye week, October 12th, they host West Virginia, Dana Holgorsen's former team. Hey, I'm just saying, man, you look down in the weeds here at this Big 12 schedule, there's a few storylines here that I really like. So interesting games for West Virginia on the schedule. I'm going to lean under here for all the reasons that I pointed out. I think Clayton Tune is just a big loss, and I'm not really high on the defense. So under 5.5 or 5 wins, I should say, for Houston.
I actually have a completely different take on Houston. I really like them. They were 26th in offensive efficiency last year. I think they're actually a pretty underrated team. I know Clayton Tune was definitely a great quarterback. And Donovan Smith, he had his moments at Tech where he would flash and you would think he had the potential to be a very good player, but then he would also have his games where you're just like, dude, what are you doing? So he's just one of those guys where you don't know what you're going to get, but the potential is certainly there to produce a good quarterback, as you mentioned. And I think in Dana Holgerson's system, having that kind of dual threat quarterback is definitely what you need. You already mentioned that with Clayton Tune and why that was so effective. Having your legs is definitely important. Let's not forget they didn't lose their best running back in Alton McCaskill, who was a true freshman. He went to Colorado. He basically had 1,000 yards as a true freshman. That is a loss. Bring in Tony Mathis. I think it's a net loss at running back. But luckily for Houston, they're more of a passing kind of team under Dana Holgerson. You did mention they lose Tank Dell, but I really like their young group of receivers. All their receivers are very young, and I would say have a lot of talent to be very promising and could potentially take a step up this year. I really like Matthew Golden. I believe he's a redshirt sophomore. 600 yards, 7 tutties last year. Sam Brown had 500 for 4. And then they bring in Stephon Johnson from Oklahoma State, who showed flashes. And then they also bring in Michael Pilot Harris as from high school, who's like a 95 grade 4-star recruit. So they've got some talent there at the wide receiver position. And I think they can more than make up for what they lose with Tank Dell. So I think they'll still be good there. You already mentioned the O-line, great in pass blocking, and that's exactly what you need to run Dana Holgerson's system. I love that so much. And I think the offense, I'm with you on the quarterback. The quarterback is the limiting factor in the offense, but I think Dana Holgerson will find a way to make it work. I really like that. As far as defense, I don't like that they lost Javarius Owens in their secondary, but overall, man, what they return and what they bring in their secondary is actually quite amazing. Isaiah Hamilton, great in coverage. They bring in Adare Halsey from New Mexico, who was elite in pass coverage per PFF grades. Latrell McCutcheon from USC, 4-star. Alex Hogan returns, great, pretty good in coverage. Malik Fleming, a very good all-around player. And these are all secondary pieces. They are going to have a pretty solid secondary without people really recognizing it. I think they're actually going to be pretty dang good in the secondary. I'm with you. I share the concerns with linebacker, complete cheeks at the linebacker position. And I think they will be susceptible to teams who have a powerful run game and a good power run offense. So I think they have great matchups against teams who really air it out. For instance, Kansas, team that can really air it out. Very good matchup for them. And I think it bodes well for Houston. I really do. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. Their defensive line, I do share some concern with that, just like you do, with the 2 huge losses that they had. They had 2 top 7 guys per PFF on their defensive line, but they also returned, you already mentioned Shidozi Nwanko, but they returned defensive end Cesar Nelson, who's very good all around. They also returned another defensive end who was a depth guy last year, but looks to step up this year and was graded really well, and John Murray Caldwell. So they still have really good pieces on their defensive line. Although it will take a step back, I still think they're going to be pretty solid. I really like their secondary. The linebackers are iffy, but overall, when I look at them compared to the other defenses in the Big 12, I think they have a lot of talent. And on both, and there's so much potential on the offensive side of the ball. I really do think Houston could be a team that plays spoiler to a lot of teams' win totals here. I think Houston's one of those teams that could beat anyone in this conference and can also lose to anyone in this conference. The same way I feel about BYU. UTSA, schedule, UTSA, probable. I'm with you, Shoob. That's not a guarantee. That's not UTSA is a quality team. Jeff Traylor's a great coach. That is not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. At Rice, that's going to be a can of whoop ass. TCU, probable. Sam Houston, dub. At Texas Tech, definitely a probable. I think they can give Tech a game, maybe steal one, but it is at Tech, so I'm going to say probably not. Bye week to prepare for Dana Holgerson's revenge tour at home versus West Virginia, W. Dana Holgerson will be quite motivated to win that game and have a whole bye week to prepare for it. And at home, yeah, give me the dub. Texas, I think they can give Texas a scare, but I think they're going to lose ultimately. At K-State, probably a loss, but I won't count them out. At Baylor, I think that's winnable. but as a probable because they're away. Cincy and Oklahoma State, I think they're going to win both those games. I think they're going to beat Cincy. I think they're going to beat Oklahoma State. And then at UCF as a probable, I think this team is minimally winning 5. I think I can definitely see this team winning 6 and going over. So I'm sticking with Houston on the over.
All right. Difference of opinion here on Houston. I like Zan's perspective. He is high on the Cougs coming into the Big 12. He thinks they can get to a bowl game. How about you, Gonzo?
Good takes, guys. I'm on the push to under, and it's really 2 reasons. I'm just interested to see what the shift from Tune to Smith is. I do have some concerns with the O-line depth. They might do their job well, but if there's injuries, I'm just concerned about what the reserves have to offer. And then for the schedule, I see multiple losses between the Texas schools, Kansas State and UCF. And I don't see Houston going bowling this year. I think 5-7 is more likely. I wouldn't be surprised though if they went bowling, but I'm definitely pushed to under on the Cougs.
All right. Gonzo and I are under on Houston. Zan is over, citing some upside with the team. I do agree with you there. You may have swayed my opinion a little bit, Zan, with that analysis, but I guess we'll see how Houston does in year 1 in the Big 12. Now time to wrap up this conference, one of the best conferences in the country from top to bottom. BYU, the final newcomer entering the conference. And gentlemen, there was some line movements this past week. We are recording on July 9th, just by the way, in case you're wondering. And BYU, I've never seen a team's win total move a full game in less than a week. It went from 5.5 all the way down to 4.5. So somebody came in with some pockets and hammered the under. But yeah, it's Kalani Sitake's 8th season at BYU. They had a weird season last year, man. They went from the highs of beating Baylor at overtime towards the beginning of the year. They were ranked. And then the perils of getting blown out by Liberty later in the season. BYU was just a mess last year. Zan, how do you think they're going to fare with a win total of 4.5 in the new Big 12?
BYU is a very, very interesting team. And as I alluded to when we were doing the Houston breakdown, I think they're one of those teams in the Big 12 this year who can be a real wild card. They can beat anyone and also lose to anyone. And we'll get into why here. Let's jump into TARP ratings, man. They're +7 in TARP. That generally means you're going to be pretty solid or at least progress. +5 on offense, +2 on defense. And they were 24th in offensive efficiency last year, 108th in defensive efficiency, which is less to be desired. But BYU's strength, man, offensive line. And I know they lost some pieces, but man, the coaching over there is fantastic. They have so much depth that even losing those pieces, they're still going to have a great unit. Line yards, 21st, sack rate, 18th. Kalani Sitake, great coach. They bring in Jay Hill from Weber State to be the defensive coordinator, who also brought in some really good transfers to bolster their defense. But we'll jump into that here in a moment. Let's start with the offense. Let's keep this in the same order that I've been doing this. Quarterback, Keaton Slovis is in. Jaron Hall is to the NFL. Keaton Slovis is at least experienced, although he didn't have a lot of success at his last stop with Pitt. He really hasn't been that great since his freshman year, when we all thought he was going to be amazing just because of the numbers he put up. He's been rather pedestrian since then, but I will say this. I think BYU is a very well-coached team, and I think they'll be able to do enough and produce enough of a good enough offensive line to see Keaton Slovis improve this year and at least have a 2-to-1 TD to pick ratio. And I think that's good enough for them to play spoiler to some teams. They lost Christopher Brooks, but they added 4-star transfer, portal transfer Aiden Robbins from UNLV, who was a 1,000-yard rusher, had 9 touchdowns. That's a good addition. They lost Puka Nasua, their best wide receiver, to the NFL, but returned Cody Epps, young player with really good potential. I like him a lot. And then Keanu Hill is also pretty solid. I love their offense, man. Look, let's go over all they lost, because they lost a ton on their offensive line. They lost Harris LaChance, Blake Freeland, and the Barrington brothers. Those are all really good pieces. So you'd probably think, wow, man, this offensive line is decimated. They're not going to be that good. Well, not so fast. They still have some pretty good pieces on their offensive line. Sure, they may not be as good as they were last year, but they're still going to be quite formidable. They have Connor Pay, who's just absolutely elite. an elite guard. They added Paul Maley from Utah, who's grades out pretty well. They have Kingsley Swamataya, who's really good in pass protection. And then they bring in a transfer from Caleb Etienne, Oklahoma State. So yes, it does take a step back, but they still have a very good unit there, and they're very well coached. I really like what they bring up, and I wouldn't be shocked if another one of those guys that fills in the hole that I didn't mention ends up grading out well by the end of the year. Very well coached on the offensive line for BYU. I think there's definitely some upside with their offense for sure. Now, when I look over at the defense, they lost cornerback Gabe Judy Laley to Tennessee. That does hurt a little bit, but as I mentioned, bringing in the new defensive coordinator from Weber State, he brings in Camden Garrett and Eddie Heckard, who are both very good in pass coverage per PFF, which I think honestly is just an overall improvement. They haven't really been very great in pass coverage in previous years, and that helps tremendously. They also bring in safety Michael Harper, who is all around a very solid player. Or sorry, they return Michael Harper, who is all around a very solid player. At linebacker, Ben Bywater returns, who's great against the pass. They added AJ Vongfachan, who's great against the run, and he's from Utah State. And then they also brought in a 4-star transfer, Harrison Taggart from Oregon at linebacker. So they've definitely got some pieces here. I know they lost Keenan Pilley to Tennessee as well. Tennessee was definitely cherry picking BYU a little bit. But ultimately, man, they brought in a lot of great pieces. Now, here's the bad part. Here's the bad part and the weakness for BYU. It's their defensive line. Their defensive line was 124th in defensive line yards last year, 128th in pass down sack rate. Absolutely dreadful. But they returned their best pass rusher in Tyler Beatty. They also returned John Nelson. So they returned their 2 best pass rushers. They also bring in Jackson Cravens from Boise, but lost Logan Fano to Utah. So this group, you can only get better, right? I still don't expect it to be a great defensive line, but I expect it to be slightly better than it was last year, just based on this. You really can't be worse than that. You're almost last in everything on the D line. But at least they're good on every other level, or at least respectable on every other level. Although I think they might be a little Swiss cheese when it comes to running. Let's look at the line, guys. 4.5. Sam Houston, Southern Utah to open it. I think they win both those games. At Arkansas, I think they can give Arkansas a game. I don't think they'll win it, but I think they can give Arkansas a game. Kansas, I think that's a probable. I think that's winnable for them. Will they win it? Who knows? But I think it's definitely a probable. Cincy, I think they can beat Cincy. I think they're coached well enough to beat Cincy. Then they get the bye week, go at TCU. That's not going to matter. Kind of sucks that you get your bye week, then have to go play TCU. I think they lose that game. They play Tech, probably a loss. Texas, probably a loss. But then you get West Virginia, Iowa State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. They can win 2 or 3 of those games, I think. Will they win 2 or 3 of those games? I don't know, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. And because of that, their line's at 4.5, man. I'm going over. I think BYU is at least going to win 5 this year. It seems very likely that they're going to win 5 games.
Xan, I share the same sentiment. The line going down a game is what led me to this conclusion that BYU will at least win 5 games in their first year as a Power 5 school in the sport of football. I think bringing Sion Pauha, who came out of retirement, he's coming in to help Kelly Poppinga coach the defensive line. I think everything we saw from their defense last year, we should throw it out the window. The bad stuff, at least. I think it's going to be overhauled D-line and just better than last year's unit. On offense, just a couple more names to highlight. Chase Roberts returns on the outside, and Darius Lassiter was a good get from Eastern Michigan. In addition, tight end Isaac Rex is getting all conference projections. And as for the schedule, I see 3 pretty much guaranteed wins of Sam Houston State, Southern Utah, and Cincinnati, which means just to get me 2. And considering they've got Iowa State on the schedule, West Virginia on the schedule, maybe they can mess around and surprise in Arkansas or Kansas. I just think given that the defense is going to be better and that this line is now 4.5 versus 5, I think it's going to be over for the Cougs. I don't think they'll be bowling, but I think they'll surpass this win total.
All right, 2 overs on BYU to start us off here. I will conclude us. So BYU, man, like I was alluding to at the beginning of this segment, just an interesting team last year. I mean, I think quarterback, let's start there. I think Jaron Hall is a significant loss. I really think he is. Keaton Slovis, very good job of supplementing that. I still think it's a little bit of a downgrade. I mean, the big question with Keaton Slovis is he ever going to return to his freshman year form where he was at USC? I mean, it's like we keep asking that with Slovis, like, oh, is he going to get back to his freshman year? Can he get back to that? Well, it's been, what, 4 years now since he was a freshman? That was like 2019. I think we kind of know what to expect here with him. And then the defense, yeah, it was an Achilles heel for them last year. And, you know, I go and look at the schedule. 2-0 start at Arkansas. I don't really like their chances in that one. I mean, Arkansas went up to Provo last year and just ran it down their throats. They dropped like 52 on them running the ball. It's not a good matchup at all. Kansas, potentially a win, but then you got to think about travel time too. I mean, BYU, they're way out there in Utah, and they got to come all the way east to play all these games. So, you know, Cincinnati at home, definitely very winnable. You know, Texas Tech, that could be like a sleeper spot where Texas Tech, you catch them napping. That could be an upset bid right there. Then they got to go all the way at West Virginia. They got to go across the country. Tail end of the season there, I think I agree with you, Xan. I think that's where they can rack up some of these wins, like having Iowa State at home, Oklahoma potentially, and then out Oklahoma State. I'm not very high on this team, but I'm with you guys. The dynamics of this line shifting is what changed me from an under 5.5 to now an over 4.5, I should say, because I think 5 wins is about right. But I would not be surprised if they only win 4 games. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this team only ends up being like 3-9 or 4-8, you know? So I'm just saying I'm not like super, super confident in this win total. In fact, my number is only projecting for 4.8 wins. So it's not like I'm super high on this over here, but yeah, we shall see. It's interesting. I noticed that BYU was the only new team that has to play both Texas and Oklahoma. And I'm sure the Big 12 did that because BYU's got a huge alumni base. So they probably just wanted to maximize TV ratings for one last year while they still have Texas and OU. But I found that interesting that they're the only new school that plays both them boys before they leave. So all in all, we'll see how it pans out, man. Bottom of the Big 12, I'll put it this way. Some of the teams we just covered, yeah, these are the worst teams in the Big 12, but you go through some of these other conferences in the Power 5, there's some really bad teams towards the bottom. It's not the case in this conference. Everybody can potentially beat anybody. The bottom of the conference is still very solid. I think top to bottom, it's the best conference in the country. And yeah, I'm very interested. I think it's going to be another fun year of Big 12 football. I think we know this conference very well, and this was fun today, boys. Went in depth on these teams and looking forward to it. Any final remarks?
Can't wait for the season to start, boys. It's going to be interesting to see how the new season, the new Big 12 pans out.
How about this? Really quick. I mean, really quick. We'll be done in a minute. If you had to pick right now, what is your Big 12 championship game?
Oh, Texas. Definitely Texas. If Texas isn't in it, then I mean, you should fire Sarkisian. Like, there's no way. Like, if Texas can't get in the Big 12 with the roster they have, fire Sark. I'd say probably Texas and either Tech or one of the purple schools. But let me not. That's too broad. I'm gonna go with Texas and Kansas State. I'm gonna say Kansas State's well coached. They do it again, but this is like preseason. I got to see what everyone looks like.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say right now, it's only July 9th. It could change, but I'd say right now, I'd say Texas over Kansas State in Dallas.
Texas Tech over Oklahoma.
Ooh.
Oh, wow. Some Texas choke.
That's a wild card right there. I like that. All right. All right. Well, that'll wrap us up for this video. Once again, thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this breakdown. If you're a fan of one of these teams or you're a Big 12 fan in general, just leave a comment, please. We love to interact with you guys. What do you agree with us on? What do you disagree with us on? What do you think we forgot about? Maybe there's something that we're missing here. You guys are fans of these teams. Let us know what you guys think. Leave a like on the video. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a good review. We would greatly appreciate it. But for Xan, Gonzo, and Shoob, this is the Saturday Scholars signing out. See y'all later. Big Ten win totals are next. Have a great day.